Welcome to the Startup Grind.
Great, so thank you all for coming. We're really excited to have our first event at Zone Vancouver. I'd like to thank some of the amazing sponsors that have helped to make this event possible. So thanks again to Zone for providing the space for us. The food back there is catered by Railtown Caters, and the drinks were provided by Provatus. As well as our giveaway this month is from Reed David Hair Products. So be sure to drop your business card in the back there and we'll do the draw at the end. And photography is being done by Julian Falk Photography, and those right there, and those pictures will be available on the Zone Vancouver website in a couple days. We also would like to thank Danny and his company Perch. If you noticed, we have his always-on video conferencing set up back there, so if you want to talk to the developers at Perch, you can get to them through there. And now I'd like to introduce our speaker, Danny Robinson. Danny has been an early-stage technology entrepreneur and an active member of the startup community in North America for over 15 years. He is currently the co-founder and CEO of Perch, an ambient video communications company. And prior to founding Perch, Danny was the CEO of BCIC, which most of you probably know is a government-owned corporation dedicated to promoting entrepreneurship in BC. He also co-founded Boot Up Labs, which we'll talk a little bit about, which was the first seed accelerator in Vancouver. They invested in several companies, including Sumify, which was acquired by Twitter, and he co-founded Boot Up Entrepreneurial Society. So welcome, Danny.
Thank you.
Great, so we just have some questions for you today. Tell me, where did you go to school?
School, I went to high school in Massachusetts.
Okay.
And then I decided for high school that I wanted to go to a university or a college, and my criteria was I want to be in the ocean, near the ocean, not in the ocean, but near the ocean. And I wanted to be back in Canada.
Okay.
So that left only really two places. In Vancouver, I'd never been to Vancouver, kind of barely even knew what Vancouver was all about. When I was 17 years old, I moved out to Vancouver and I didn't get into any of the universities, which is really hilarious since I was CEO of BCIC and I went to fund the university. So I reminded the deans of the fact that they turned me down right before they asked me for money. So.
That's awesome.
And then I ended up getting into Capilano College. So I went to Capilano College for about 2 years, but while I was in there, I started my first company and didn't go back after that.
Okay. And that first company, what was that?
First company was called Logical Impressions. It was a desktop publishing company. Back then, Corel Draw was kind of cool, and I learned how to use Corel Draw, so I made menus and advertisements for newspapers. One of my biggest customers was based in Whistler, and it was that we made labels for bottles. So I went up there and made labels for bottles.
Okay, and how did that end for you?
That company in Whistler ended up sort of aqua-hiring me before that was a term. So I ended up moving to Whistler and living there for a number of years, 2 years or so. It was awesome. I didn't really realize that the company that bought me was actually a startup. I didn't know what a startup was. I didn't really understand the concept. So I got my first taste of it right then.
Cool. And did you get any funding for that company?
The first company? Well, it really wasn't my company.
No.
Sorry, the Logical Impressions company was my company. No, I just made labels and got paid for them. It was a big deal.
What about the next startup after that?
Next one after that, I guess. So after that, I did some IT consulting, which is independent IT consultant stuff. And then the first sort of real company that I started was called Spinway. It was during the dot-com craze in 1998. I started it. 1999, I got it funded, and by the end of 2000, we had 8 million users dialing up to our free ISP, which was ad-supported, and we did that in about 11 months in terms of the ramp-up. Had over 350 employees.
Wow.
It was a crazy time.
That's crazy. So how did you find getting that funding compared to how you would say the space is today for funding?
It was different. It's definitely a lot different. I mean, a lot of people like to say that back then that people were making really crazy, stupid decisions, and they were, but still wasn't easy to raise funding. I think that's a misnomer. I think a lot of people think, oh, .com days, all you do is go down there with some crazy idea to get a social network for dogs or something, and people were going to fund you. And that's not the case. I mean, it was still really hard, very competitive, trying to get funding. We got lucky we pivoted a couple of times, of course, before that was a term, and got to the point where people wanted to fund us, so we got lucky.
What was the biggest lesson that you learned from that?
Biggest lesson that we learned, if you don't know all the answers, no matter what, you won't know all the answers. So if you try to wait for all the answers, you'll never start. So just start.
Cool, good advice, thanks. So then you co-founded the first seed accelerator in Vancouver, Boot Up Labs. Could you tell us a little bit about how that started?
Well, yeah, there's almost a 10-year jump there, but yeah, so I moved to Vancouver and started a company called PureFlix, but that was really based in the Valley, even though I lived here and had an office here. I didn't know anybody in Vancouver, so I just was on a plane once a month to go down to the Valley, and built and funded it from US VCs, did everything down there. So I really didn't understand what Vancouver's all about. So then I went and said after that, I decided that we weren't going to leave Vancouver. We're going to stay here, raise our kids here. My wife and I, were tested numerous times to move back, and we resisted all of those temptations and made a commitment to stay. And once we did that, we decided to start our next company, which was Strata, in 2007. And we started that, but we decided only from Vancouver sources. So we got involved with community. We raised money from GrowthWorks and Telefilm and a bunch of local angels. And then we really quickly through that process, we realized why it was so hard to start a company in Vancouver compared to the Valley.
And why is that?
Well, at the time, it's gotten better, a lot better. But at the time, the culture around building a technology company wasn't there. Employees didn't understand what a stock option was. They didn't understand, why that was something that they should get, should take a less salary for in exchange for stock options. They didn't understand the concept of upside. The sort of the little thing that I tell people is that, everybody driving around in a Ferrari out here that was in a tech company didn't buy that Ferrari from their salary. Everybody got it from getting stock options in a company that did really well. So if you're starting a company, first of all, you need to be super passionate about the company and what the company's trying to do. That's number one. But if you're going to take the risk to do a startup, then you've got to have the upside, and the only way to get that upside is the stock options. So you should understand that part of it, is if it's going to be the majority of your compensation. So that was one thing. I think the whole culture around how the pay it forward culture. In the Valley, if you go down there and you need help and you're a first time entrepreneur. You meet somebody somewhere at one point in some event or a coffee shop or whatever, and they will literally sit right down with you and help you. And then after they help you, at the end of the meeting, they're going to okay, there's 4 or 5 people, call all these people, tell them I told you to call them, and go visit with them. And then you talk to those people, and they say, and each one of them says, call these 4 or 5 people. And that and they don't ask for anything in return. That's just the way they do it there. There's even some companies that literally competed directly with me at times. I was the little guy and they were the big guy, and they're like, just call these people, they're going to help you out, and we're competitors, right? So it's just a different kind of mentality that I thought we needed to try to build in a little bit into the Vancouver culture as well.
And do you think that has happened?
I do, yeah. I see it a lot. I know that the people that I surround myself do that regularly. We all joke about how much time we sort of carve out of our schedules to, answer, an entrepreneur who really wants to go grab coffee or whatever, sort of almost challenge each other and says, I did more than you did, it's good. I think I think everybody at every level of the startup community, it doesn't matter if you're first year into a startup, never been in a startup before, and your first year in, you have something to add. You have something to help the next person, and you should do that.
Awesome. Did you make it to a second round of funding with Strata?
We didn't need to. The company's profitable, it's growing. We've the past month we grew from 12 to 24 employees, so it's been an absolute massive month for us. And we're growing, everything's just going crazy all of a sudden, which has been great. The company's doing really well now. But at that, backing up to when I first started Strata in 2007, we started it as something totally different, as the way it goes. No matter what you're starting, by the time you're done, it's going to not look like anything like what you thought it was, like your vision was when you first started. So another reason why you should just start and not think that you have all the answers. But about a year after we started Strata, we pivoted Strata into a whole other company, which is what it is today. But when we did that, at the same time, I saw this I had this list of things that Vancouver needed to be a great startup community.
Could you give us a couple of those things?
Jeez, I knew you were going to ask that. I just remember having a list. Well, I mean, again, I think it's just the culture, just the attitude around giving it your all and going after your passion, what you believe in. I think there's a lot of people who just, I know, the biggest one was failure, the failure thing. There's been people that had failed in Vancouver, and I would hear when I go to an event or whatever that they would be like almost talking down about that person. And I'd be like, that's crazy, that person tried. Not only did they try, they learned a shitload. And now, if they try again, the chances of them doing better the second time around is going to be at least 10x is what they did the first time around. It's like when you play a video game, right? The first time you try to pass level 1, you're going to die. Like the second time, you might make it, right? It's the same thing. You'll learn a lot the first time around, and people shouldn't ever, judge a person by the failures. I mean, Spinway, no investors made their money back, but I made nothing. Effectively, it was a failure, right? And PureFlix, I mean, some of the investors lost their money, and it's a failure too. Right, but I'm still at it, and I feel like I learned a lot through all those processes. So I think it's something to be applauded if you give it a shot, and don't make it. You should definitely get another shot.
Do you think the attitude towards failing has changed since then?
I do. I don't hear people talking down about the first time .comers who were in Vancouver going at it. Some of them had some pretty harsh things talked about, and I witnessed some of those. And I was like, I was along with other people, was one of the first people to sort of just say that's not how it works, right? Like they learned a lot, and I try now, right? And there's examples of that. I probably would speak out of turn if I mentioned the names, but there's examples of that person in particular I'm thinking about. Just recently sold their second company, and made millions, and there's a perfect example right there. So.
Great, so let's go back to Boot Up Labs now.
Yeah.
So you started that with?
When we realized this list was there, Boris Mann and I would joke around about doing something about it, and we and my wife Maura, who started Strata with, decided she would take over Strata and allow me to go and build Boot Up Labs instead of build Strata out. So she started to build Strata out. I built Boot Up Labs with Boris. We decided to figure out a way to help entrepreneurs get to that first level of funding. So from zero to funding is kind of the space that we thought that was the biggest hole in Vancouver. People were very conservatively minded in Vancouver. Investors weren't investing in people. They were investing in traction, and you can't get traction unless you give the person the chance to get there. And even then, it was more expensive to do a startup than it is today. Today, it's actually less expensive. So you can sometimes get to traction without any funding, and if you can, more power to you. Go for that, do that. But if you need a little bit of money, we felt that there was definitely room for an accelerator. So we thought through the old model, and back then it was Techstars and Y Combinator. And Techstars just got started around the same time we did. So we were both trying to figure it out. And I knew from my very first company, it was funded by a company called SoftBank. And SoftBank, their managing director of SoftBank was Brad Feld. And Brad Feld is a guy from Colorado who funded and created, well, Dave Cohen made SoftBank, but Brad Feld was the guy who funded it and put his whole brand and name behind it to get the attention it needed. And Techstars ended up becoming sort of the example of what Vancouver needed. So we went to Boulder, Colorado, and hung out with them for a little while and came back, and Boris and I were convinced that's what we had to do, so we did it.
Awesome. So then where did you get funding for that from?
So it was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. It's way harder to raise money for a fund than it is to raise money for a company. And I took that for granted. I was like, yeah, no problem, we're going to do this. But it turns out that the angels that would fund a fund were generally angels because it's fun to be an angel. And if they give us the money to invest, then we're taking away all their fun. And I didn't see that. So it was really hard. We raised money from a group of angels, and we had 2 funds independently, and GrowthWorks funded both of them. So they were the only institutional fund that was in there, with the exception, I guess, Plaza Corp in Ontario. They were in there too.
Cool. So tell me a little bit about the first companies that you had in Boot Up Labs.
Yeah, first companies were, they were all local companies. They were, geez, I'm testimony. I got the craft, I'm 40 years old now, so I can't remember a fucking thing. It's my mom's joke, so. So the first companies were contractually, which is still going. I don't know if you guys know Martin. He's at Full Stack, which is where Boris Mann is now. And it's starting to do really well now. And I mean, I know it's been a long time, but sometimes it takes time to find that product market fit. And then once you hit it, it just goes. So we're pretty excited about what Martin's working on. We had Dime Rocker, which spawned out this another company called Cinecoup, which just did this whole $1 million film contest that was sponsored by Cineplex Odeon. And that film, that's done. There was a winning one. I think it's Wolf Cop, I think is the name of the movie that's getting created right now, which I'm sure everybody's going to run to the theater to watch. But it's got $1 million budget, so it's obviously low budget, but I think it's going to be a pretty good movie. And it's going to be shown at every Cineplex Odeon in Canada. I think that was the part of the prize. To get a theatrical release like that for an indie film is extremely hard to do. And Jay and the team pulled off that whole thing, and it's been going really well. And then, who's the other guys? After that, there's 3 cohorts. So in this first fund, there's 2 cohorts. The second fund, there's 1 cohort. So the next cohort was Layer Boom, which sold to Joyent. That was Trevor and Howie. Trevor is on his another company at Full Stack with Boris Mann still now. And that company is called Caliper, and it's doing pretty well. From what I've been hearing, it's doing really well. That's what I mean by those repeat entrepreneurs. Once you get the bug and you're an entrepreneur, just count it over. You're going to be an entrepreneur forever. That's just the way it goes. So that's Trevor. Trevor was he wasn't sure, he was going to think about it, he wanted to do it, and then we kind of said, you'd be perfect, and then he did it and sold his company, and now he's on to his next one. He can't help it. Yeah, so I think that's most of them.
Thanks. So Boot Up Labs didn't turn out exactly how you had planned. Can you tell us a bit about how that unfolded?
I think I know what you're talking about. So we had, for Fund 2, we were raising another fund, and we had commitments. And the way funds usually work is you get commitments for funding, and then when you find a company to fund, you then ask for the money. They call it a capital call. And the way that works is if you ask the person who committed the funds to fund, and they don't give you the money, then they lose their upside for any previous funds that they put in. There's all sorts of different variations of that, but that's generally the case. So it's pretty draconian if they don't fund it. It's bad. And it's kind of what happened to me. I went to did a capital call, and one of my investors couldn't fund it. And that investor couldn't fund it for a reason that I couldn't really fight, and that was because Haiti just had this big, huge earthquake. I don't know if you remember back then.
Yes.
That person was donating their money to the cause instead, and I was like, that's a good reason, damn it! But that's gonna really hurt. So I ended up missing that capital call and having to send a couple companies home. But I think, that was a painful moment for everybody. The company the companies got cut and had to go. That was very painful for them. I totally empathize. And it was obviously painful for us as well. But in the end of the day, they're taking a risk to start a company in the first place. Those risks were fully communicated. There was no surprises. And then on the other hand, at the end of the day, Boot Up is actually doing pretty well. So we made Boot Up because of the Lairboom exit and because of the Summify exit to Twitter. Boot Up, we'll see how much money we're going to make on the Twitter exit. It's just about to happen. But we're pretty confident it's going to be pretty lucrative for everybody.
Great. So if you guys were making money, why did you end Boot Up Labs?
Well, we still technically haven't made money, right? Like it takes a while for those exits to come through financially, right? But the reason why is because I honestly didn't think that, I would sit there at my desk helping entrepreneurs build their companies. When I realized that it was always their companies that I was helping, and I wasn't building my own company anymore. And I missed the ability or the whole process of building your own company. And I wanted to get back to that. That's why I decided Boot Up Labs just wasn't my long-term thing that I thought it was going to be. So I decided after we finished the last cohort that I would leave or not do it anymore.
Fair enough. If you could do it all over again, is there anything you would do differently?
Yeah, I would not accept the companies into the cohort until I completed the capital call.
Fair enough. So you've actually stated that it's in situations like that, it's best to confess, correct, and move on. What did you move on to?
Yeah, so I moved on to, I was asked to come in and provide a strategic plan for the government of British Columbia to help with innovation and startups and entrepreneurship for the province. So I joined BCIC as the CEO for a certain amount of time just to put together the plan. I think that the government is probably hell on earth for every entrepreneur on the planet. I knew that intellectually, but I for some reason had this morbid curiosity to go figure out how maybe I can bust down hell, right? And there's no freaking way you can bust down the government. It's just fire and brimstone down there, I swear to God. I put together the plan. I did exactly what I said I'd do, and I did it earlier than what I said I'd do because I just want to get the hell out of there. And we agreed to go our separate ways. And the guy who came in after me just executed on that plan. They're still doing that right now, which I'm very proud of. I'm very proud of the work that everybody in the company did those 9 months or so that I was there.
Good. Is it true that you joined Dragon's Den last year?
I didn't join Dragon's Den. I was a guest dragon.
Okay,
yeah.
Can you tell us a bit about that?
I can't remember how the situation came up, but I got invited to go and sit with Bruce Croxton and the Boston Pizza guy. Where? No. Jim Trevelling. Yeah. So we sat there and we judged a couple of companies that came up on stage and pitched their ideas, and it was a blast. It was so much fun. Those guys are hilarious.
How did you evaluate the companies?
We just evaluate like we evaluate every other company.
So it wasn't any different as to how you would evaluate them personally for Boot Up Labs?
Yeah, no, I actually had a very contrarian view compared to the other guys in a lot of cases, which was cool because I think they don't. I don't think they invest in tech companies a lot on that show. Like once in a while they get one, but sometimes they're all different. And I would sit at home and watch that show sometimes, and I would just be squirming in my chair, feeling like those guys are just screwing the entrepreneurs.
Totally.
So bad, and I'm like, don't take the deal!
And then they do.
And then they do, and I'm like, oh no! And then, so when I was up there, they said, yeah, I give you this valuation, or this much for that percent, and I'd be like, that's freaking crazy, you know, like, you know what I mean? You gotta leave the entrepreneur with something, like they gotta have some incentive to continue on to make money and all that kind of stuff too, so.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So was there any like special criteria that you were using, and what about now? Would you change that criteria in any way?
Well, at Put Up Labs we had some pretty published criteria, and I've even kind of thought through that a little bit more. I mean, I think that there's lots of examples or outliers potentially of companies that got started with different types of formulas, but I would say that the least risky formula for an investor is a startup who has 3 founders. We used to say 2 is a minimum at Put Up Labs. So a startup with 3 founders, one is a designer, the other's a hacker, the last one's a hustler. I forget who said that, maybe Dave or something. But somebody said that, not me. But every group of founders I've found that have those 3 components, those skill sets in the same group, I found have definitely chances of success are way higher. That's what I'm trying to say. So I look for that. I look for the hustler to have, unbridled passion. The passion has to be, like just exploding out of them. They know they're going to like make a multi-billion-dollar company. It's just going to happen, and they can explain how. They can explain all the different competitors, the market positions, their values. They just absorb the entire thing. They exude that knowledge, that confidence that they know what they're talking about. And unlike Canadian, resist your urge to apologize all the time. I'm sorry, but just do that. Because it just makes it look like you don't know what you're talking about. You're almost apologizing already for not knowing something, but you do know. I bet you know, and it's a habit more than it is something you need to apologize for. So just go in with utter confidence.
Great. One of the biggest problems I think most startups in Vancouver find is trying to find that talent for the developer side. Did you find that as an issue, and what would you say to startups who are looking for those people?
Yeah, I mean, I think I still have the issue. We have the issue. Ian's that like we're constantly looking for awesome developers, just like everybody else is. So that's not a secret. I mean, that we're no different than anybody else in that way. But I think that the common thing I see is like the hustler founder, who's going, I got a great idea. It's going to be the best thing ever. Like, I just need a co-founder. I just need a developer. Can you help me out? I'm like, no, I can't help you. There's about 1 billion people looking for developers just like you, and they're all taken. So, you know what I mean? So I think that there's really no secret bullet there. I think there's a whole flurry of new recruiting startups, hiring startups. Matt from Matt Miskowitz, who's doing Hired.com. I'm watching that one pretty carefully. I'm probably going to start to use that. There's Karma Hire, which we've used quite a bit. Who else do we use? Karma Hire is at a Grow Lab, I believe, isn't it?
Yes, they are. And
they've done really well. For us, they've really worked. So.
What technology are you most excited about right now?
Video.
Yeah.
Perch. What technology? I mean, I don't know. I'm a believer in any technology that can bring the humanity back to technology. So I think that text communications is the opposite of the natural human way that people communicate. And voice is better, so more phone calls is better, and video is the ultimate. Or face-to-face in front of you is the ultimate, but video is between those two. Video, if you can't be face-to-face with somebody, you should be on video.
Awesome. And what's next for you in the next couple of years with Perch, and then following that?
So Perch is what's next for me for the indefinite future.
Okay.
But out of boot up into BCIC, and then into Perch, the mission and my personal sort of desire has stayed the same, and that's to make Vancouver the best place in the world to start a tech company. Like I just have that. That's what I want to do with my life, and I've just seen I've just watched it enough to believe that if I can build $1 billion company in Vancouver and stay here and build it homegrown here, I'm going to do more for the tech community than boot up and launch parties and all the other things I've ever done combined times 10, right? Like, it's building that big company creates an ecosystem of more entrepreneurs, more angel investors, more, a whole bunch of all the ingredients you need. Usually you get spawned out of bigger companies. So Hootsuite, of course, I think is an amazing anchor company for our community, and I've heard Ryan state the same intent in terms of building the first $1 billion company here, and race is on.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
I'm going to open it up to anyone who'd like to ask questions at this point in time. So
Why did you call it Perch?
Kind of, you perch it up. You perch a can like an iPad up on the wall. My wife named it, and we did those name storming things where you spend a week coming up with every name possible. And before we even started that process, she's walking by and she goes, "What are you doing?" Like, "We're going to rename the company." She goes, "You call it Perch?" And walked in. And then we spent 2 weeks trying to think of a better name, and then just call it Perch. That's what she does all the time.
What are some lesser known resources that you wish more entrepreneurs, particularly in Vancouver, would know about and use?
They're not so much lesser known, but I find it remarkable how often entrepreneurs don't use them, and that's things like Crunchbase. Like, if you're not in Crunchbase, you don't exist in the Valley as a tech startup. Like, that's where people go to make sure you're there. And AngelList is the same, maybe more so now, but I think AngelList and Crunchbase sync their data with each other. So you got to be there just as a listing. Other things are events, like go to the events. I mean, I'm looking around the room here. I only see a few familiar faces, which is awesome. So welcome, or thank you for having me. Whatever way it goes, like I'm glad to see a lot more people getting into the startup community. But I can't stress more how important the network is. Get out there and meet people and talk to people after work. Every day that you can. Vancouver Pixel Crafters. What else? There's millions of them now.
I mean, there's Startup Grind, that's why we're all here.
Yeah, exactly. Startup Grind, and then there's Launch Academy and Grow Lab, of course.
Full Stack.
Full Stack is doing also. They do the Vancouver Pixel Crafter stuff, right?
There's actually a new working space called Cranium. I think Alex is here tonight, so if you want to talk to him.
There you go.
There's all kinds of
Alex,
right there.
There you go.
Back there?
From your perspective, how important do you think the creative and the branding parts of the business is at the startup phase? Is it worth investing in for a startup to skip 2 years of pain to find that product market fit, or do you think it's not worth the investment at that stage?
I mean, 1/3, right? Like the designer, the creative person, I think is just as important as the guy raising the money, and is just as important as the guy writing code. When you're first starting, you need all 3 of those components. I wouldn't outsource it. Like, if you can't get that as a co-founder, I would maybe I would like get a contractor to come in and do one thing, but that would just be out of desperation. So yeah, no, it's critically important. I mean, you gotta read Eric Ries's book, for God's sakes. I mean, it works, right? Lean startup is a real thing. So you don't know the answer. So you can't get a traditional marketing person to come in and find the product marketing fit through, surveys and whatever. The only way to do it is to build little versions of the product, test your ideas, get feedback. We did that at Perch. How many times in? 40-something times, right? Like,
More than that.
yeah, by the time we found what is now finally working, it took us like 40 times of iteration. We got minor success in different areas, but it just wasn't good enough for us. We pulled it back. and say, nope, not good enough, and we do it over. Right? So, pretty important.
Yeah, on the note of, I guess, having co-founders, I'm sure a lot of people in the room here might be looking at starting something soon. They've got a couple friends who may be designers and hackers, and maybe there's 4 or 5 friends that also want to join. I'm kind of pointing towards the question of how many co-founders is enough, because a problem I've had in the past is having too many co-founders. But then again, we didn't really sort of structure things the best way, so maybe you can talk about that, and also the idea of like splitting equity, investing. Maybe you can talk about what's the best way to start, and where do you draw the line of like, this is enough talents, these other people maybe aren't adding enough value.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a good question, and it is a problem that has been solved, lucky for you. So you don't actually have to worry too much about that. The way it's been solved is through reverse vesting agreements. So when you're lucky enough to have too many co-founders, which is an awesome problem to have, by the way. The not enough co-founder problem is way worse than too many. And if you're lucky enough to have too many, you make sure everybody has a reverse vesting agreement in place. You try not to split it perfectly down the middle. You try to value everybody's contribution one way or the other. Say, okay, I'm going to do this, you're going to do that. You're going to keep your day job, which I don't recommend, but you're going to do that. Then you get a different deal than me, and that's going to be. You kind of try to value it out, right? And then once everybody comes to an agreement, you go through the process, and then when you start building the company, and somebody will always be the one who just doesn't pull their weight. It just happens. I mean, almost every time I see it happen, there's the guy I can almost point to him, like, you're the guy that's going to be out of here. I know it, you don't, but you're going to be gone in like 6 months, and and it happens every time. So that's why you're protected by a reverse vesting agreement. The rest of the people that stay with it are protected. That person doesn't get to walk away with all their shares. So yeah, just rely on the systems that are in place to protect you.
I don't see it very much in Vancouver. I'm wondering if you've dabbled at all in crowdfunding situations.
Only the AngelList stuff. I've been playing with it, looking at the new syndication stuff that's been out, but not really. I know the AngelList guys, and we talked a lot about how they were going to put it all together, and I think it's absolutely genius the way they've done it. Are you talking more about Kickstarter stuff then?
That sort of thing, yeah.
So Kickstarter is more like just pre-buying, right, versus crowdfunding, which is buying equity from the crowd. They call it crowdfunding, I know, but the way I look is like, I'm just going to put a deposit on something that doesn't exist yet.
No, I meant because you had difficulties with angel investors, whether you had at all looked at the crowdfunding model as part of your equity call kind of thing, or capital call kind of situation.
Oh, I see what you're saying, yeah. I wonder if that would work.
Anyway, something to throw out. You probably haven't worked on it, but that's okay.
Yeah, no, I mean, if Kickstarter existed when I was starting Boot Up, could I put Boot Up on Kickstarter? I wonder. That would be a good idea.
Right back there.
Do you recommend 48 hours in the valley for Vancouver startups?
Couldn't recommend it more. I've been to a number of them. I'm a charter member of the C100. It's, again, that networking thing that you're going to do locally here is, times 100 in the valley, right? Like, it's so valuable, and in 48 hours you'll get connected to people who will literally change the course of your entire company, I can guarantee you.
How do people get your vote?
Just like, we gotta get to know each other. And just like that's what networking is all about. You get to know people, and people will only do business with people they trust, and you can't trust people unless you get to know them. Sometimes I get people say, hey, I know so and so. Would you mind recommending my company 48 Hours in the Valley? It's like, well, I don't know you I don't know you at all, so sorry, because that's my name kind of going down there for something like that. When it's kind of just introducing you to where there's a fit, like if I know Bob is into clean tech stuff, and you're a clean tech company, and I make that introduction to Bob, I'll probably do that with less worry of because I'm just facilitating conversations. But the 48 Hours in the Valley is a more highly competitive kind of slot to get. So I'm more careful with who I nominate.
So it costs a lot.
Lots of coffee.
Great, well, thank you so much for coming, Danny, and thank you to everyone here. We'll open it back up and we can continue to have some drinks and talk with the Perch people and see a bit more about your technology.
Sure.